So far, we've looked at how the forces of supply and demand interact to determine the price of a good or service and the quantity of that good or service that will be bought and sold. In theory, the price will settle at some level where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded, and we will be in equilibrium. But what happens when the government decides that that equilibrium price is for some reason too high or too low? This brings us to the topic of our next few videos, price controls. Today, we're going to be looking at one type of price control that is designed to keep prices down, and those are price ceilings. I'm Mr. Racine. Welcome to today's episode of
Economics videos that don't suck.
Legal disclaimer. To illustrate the concept of price ceilings, we're going to use a real example, that of rent control, a government policy designed to keep the rental price of houses down, thereby creating a price ceiling on the rental housing market. Let's first consider the property rental market in an imaginary economy, Sitcomville. This is Jerry. He's a stand-up comedian and he's willing to pay $3,000 a month for an apartment. This is Chandler and Joey. They're an actor and who knows what. And together they're also willing to pay $3,000 for an apartment. And this is Ted. He's a professor at a university and he's also willing to pay $3,000 for an apartment. In addition, we have Monica, who's a chef. She's only willing to pay $2,000 a month for an apartment. We also have Frazier, a psychiatrist who lives with his dad, but he'd be willing to move out and find his own apartment at a rental price of $2,000. And finally, we have Phoebe, a folk singer, who is also willing to rent an apartment at a price of $2,000. Okay, so if the rental price of apartments in this market is $4,000, nobody can afford it, nobody's going to rent an apartment. If the price is $3,000, there's going to be 3 parties that are going to be willing to shell out that money to rent an apartment. And at a price of $2,000, there will be 6 different parties willing to rent an apartment. Let's assume that we have a number of landlords that are looking to rent out their apartments in this market as well, and they're all willing to rent out their apartments at different prices, and as a result, this is the supply curve for rental apartments in our market. Looking at our diagram, it seems clear that our equilibrium price is $3,000 per month, and equilibrium quantity is 3 apartments rented. Now, let's introduce the concept of rent control as a price ceiling. Rent control is a government policy that seeks to limit the rate at which rental prices on apartments and other housing can rise. Implemented correctly, it puts an upper limit on the amount of rent that landlords can lease their apartments for. As a result, rent control is an example of a price ceiling, a government-set legal maximum price at which producers and sellers of a good or service are allowed to sell their product or service for. Rent control creates winners and losers, as we're about to see, and as a result, it's a contentious issue. But it continues to be used in some cities across the U.S. in some form or another, including New York City, Oakland, California, or Washington, D.C., while other cities like Boston have scrapped the practice years ago. Let's assume that in our economy, the government decides that rents are too high and is going to impose a legal maximum price that landlords can rent their apartments out, and that maximum price is going to be set at $2,000. Okay, no, this is an oversimplification of the real world. Apartments are all different and landlords are all different and rents aren't all the same. But for the purposes of our exercise, let's assume that all apartments are essentially identical and only one price can be charged in the market. At this lower rental price of $2,000 per month, Frazier's willing to move out of his dad's apartment and go look for his own place. Monica can now afford a place, and Phoebe is also going to be willing to rent an apartment. As a result, now quantity demanded of apartments rises to 6 apartments, and that makes sense. When the price falls, more people should be willing to rent apartments. But at the same time, at this mandated lower rental price, which landlords are now restricted to, some landlords are going to decide that it's just not worth it for them to rent out their apartment at this lower price. They could use the apartment for something else. They could sell it, they could use it themselves, but they're just not going to rent it out if they can only get $2,000. So, sorry, Jerry, when your lease is up, you're out, buddy. As a result, the quantity supplied of apartments now falls to only 2. Quantity supplied is 2, quantity demanded is 6. There's a shortage of apartments in this market. Which brings us to mildly interesting fact number 1. Price ceilings cause shortages. If you set a price ceiling below equilibrium price, clearly more people are going to be willing to buy the product. That's the law of demand. And fewer suppliers are going to be willing to sell the product. That's the law of supply. As a result, quantity supplied is going to fall short of quantity demanded, and shortages will exist in the market. While Phoebe and Monica and Frasier not getting apartments might not seem like such a big deal because they weren't going to be getting an apartment anyways when there wasn't rent control, we also have this issue of Jerry, who is willing to pay $3,000. He had the money. He would be willing to pay it, but now he can't get the apartment even though he's willing to pay a price higher than what rent control is setting. And that clearly is bad. This phenomenon can be seen in cities like New York City or Berkeley, where there are significant housing shortages. Now, there are probably a host of other issues that have also contributed to these housing shortages over the years, but it seems clear that rent control, at the very least, isn't making the situation any better. So, if rent control causes all this havoc and causes people like Jerry to not be able to get an apartment, why do governments implement them at all? Well, clearly, some people need to be made better off by rent control. Okay, here we have a more generic supply and demand curve for a market and a price ceiling that has been implemented by the government and the shortage that has resulted due to the implementation of this price ceiling. So who benefits? Well, some consumers are made better off. These guys right here. Everyone who's able to actually buy the good or service at this lower price is clearly going to be better off. They're able to buy it for cheaper, and that's good. But are all consumers made better off? Clearly no, right? There's a whole bunch of other consumers who are willing to buy the product at this lower price, but now they can't get their hands on it because supply is simply not enough. Even worse, there's a group of consumers who are willing to pay a higher price than the price ceiling to get the good or service, but they still aren't able to get it due to the shortage that is created. What about suppliers? In our example, the landlords. Well, clearly, suppliers are all worse off. They're forced to sell at a lower price, and they're going to sell less as some suppliers are going to decide to decrease the quantity that they supply due to the lower price that they're now getting. Which brings us to mildly interesting fact number 2. Some consumers are made better off as a result of price ceilings because they get the good at a lower price. Some are made worse off because now they're not able to get the good at all, and all producers are made worse off as they're forced to sell at a lower price and there's a lower quantity supplied. Let's dive further into our stakeholder analysis by looking at consumer surplus, producer surplus, and social surplus. When we don't have a price ceiling, this area here is consumer surplus, the area above price, below demand curve, and to the left of the quantity that they consume. Now, when we implement the price ceiling, the price falls to this lower price here, and consumer surplus is now this area. Why don't we go all the way out here, the entire area above price and below the demand curve? Well, you don't get consumer surplus from something that you don't actually buy. Consumer surplus is only extracted when the consumer is able to buy a good or service at a price lower than the price they would have been willing to pay. As a result, consumer surplus is bounded by the quantity that actually gets bought and sold. So consumer surplus is now this area here. Technically, consumer surplus could go up or down. It all depends upon how much the quantity falls and how far the price has fallen as well. Before the implementation of the price ceiling, this area is producer surplus, the area below price and above the supply curve. Now that we implement the price ceiling, price falls, and now producers are faced with this lower producer surplus, which makes sense because they're going to be selling less and they're going to be selling at a lower price. Okay, altogether we can see that this is producer surplus and this is consumer surplus when we have no price ceiling. Added together, we call it social surplus with no price ceiling. This is consumer surplus and this is producer surplus with the price ceiling. Added together, this is social surplus with the price ceiling. Social surplus with no price ceiling, social surplus with a price ceiling. Social surplus with no price ceiling, social surplus with a price ceiling. What do you see? What did we lose? Yeah, this thing here. Before we had it in the form of social surplus and now it's gone. This is what we're going to call the loss of social surplus or deadweight loss that arises as a result of a price ceiling. Which brings us to mildly interesting fact number 3. Price ceilings cause there to be deadweight loss or loss of social surplus in the market. Okay, let's consider allocative efficiency. When there's no price ceiling, we know that if there are no externalities, supply is equal to marginal cost, and demand is equal to marginal benefit. And at equilibrium quantity, as a result, this is marginal cost, and this is marginal benefit. We see that they're equal to one another. At equilibrium, marginal cost equals marginal benefit. The additional benefit to consumers of buying and consuming that last unit is equal to the additional cost to producers of making and selling that last unit. And this is what we call allocative efficiency. Okay, what about after we implement the price ceiling? After implementing the price ceiling, producers are going to produce and sell less, law of supply. This is the quantity that is now produced and sold. When we produce this quantity, is the market achieving allocative efficiency? Well, at this quantity, this is marginal benefit, and this is marginal cost. Marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost. There's an under-allocation of resources to the production of this good or service. Too little is being produced. That brings us to mildly interesting fact number 4. Price ceilings make it not possible to achieve allocative efficiency in the market. Finally, let's consider some other unintended side effects of price ceilings. Let's say that I'm in the market for an apartment and I've found like my dream apartment. The location is perfect, amenities, just everything. I really, really, really want it. So I go down to the apartment with money in hand and I'm ready to sign the lease. But when I get there, I realize that due to rent control and the shortage of housing in the market, there's like 300 other people that I'm also competing with trying to get, I want it, trying to get this apartment. So what can I do? Okay, time out, stop. What could I do if I really, really, really want this apartment and I want to make sure that he's giving it to me? If I really wanted it, I could get an extra $1,000 and maybe just kind of secretly give it to him to make sure that I get the apartment. This would be clearly illegal, as the law says the maximum that I'm allowed to pay this guy for an apartment is $2,000 a month. But I could say, hey, I'll give you the extra $1,000 for a total of $3,000, just we won't tell anyone. These illegal markets which seek to circumvent price ceilings are called black markets, and they are one side effect of price ceilings. Which brings us to mildly interesting fact number 5. Price ceilings can lead to black markets arising. Finally, we need to consider, how do we actually decide who gets the apartment when we have price ceilings? What is the method of allocation? When we have no price ceilings, we use the price mechanism to allocate the good or service. If you're willing to pay $500 for an Xbox, you get an Xbox. If you're not willing to pay $500 for an Xbox, you don't get an Xbox. That's the price mechanism in a nutshell. But once we implement a price ceiling, we can no longer rely upon this price mechanism. Why? Because in my example, there's like a ton of people who are willing to pay $2,000 to get an apartment. But there's simply not enough apartments to enable every single person who's willing to pay that price to actually get one. So we need to rely on some other method of allocation to decide who actually gets the apartment. It could be like a lottery, which is truly random. It could be like first come, first serve. Whoever gets to the apartment first gets it. It could be based on some sort of like favoritism. Who do I like best? But again, that has the potential for corruption, clearly. But the most important point is we can't rely upon the price mechanism anymore because of the shortages that are created and by the fact that there's not enough supply to meet demand. Mildly interesting fact number 6, price ceilings require some method of allocation other than the price mechanism. Okay, so this has been price ceilings, and the price ceiling example that we used was rent control. Let's do a quick recap. 1. Price ceilings are a legal maximum price set by the government that suppliers are allowed to sell their product for. 2. Price ceilings cause there to be shortages. As quantity demanded rises, quantity supplied falls, and shortages are created. 3. Price ceilings cause there to be deadweight loss in the market. Social surplus will surely decrease once we've implemented a price ceiling. 4. Price ceilings make allocative efficiency impossible to achieve, as there's going to be an under-allocation of the production of goods in that market. 5. Price ceilings have some other unintended side effects, including black markets and the necessity of a non-price method of allocation. Okay, in our next video, we're going to be taking a look at the opposite of price ceilings, and these are price floors. What happens when the government decides that prices are too low? We're going to have 2 separate videos, one for minimum wage and one for price floors on agricultural goods. Hope to see you there. Hey, what's going on? I hope you liked this video and it helped clarify some of the stuff you're working on in your current economics studies. If you're looking for more resources to help you with AP Economics, IB Economics, intro-level university economics, economics teaching resources, 1. Go check out our website, Economics Videos That Don't Suck, evtds.com, for access to our entire catalog of economics videos, as well as practice questions, answers, and even entire mock exams. 2. Be sure to subscribe to this channel, Economics Videos That Don't Suck, so you can get immediate access to all of our new videos as they're released, probably mirroring your economic studies right now.